Recording in progress.
All right, part two. Part two
Yes.
of our discussion
Back.
of mental health and the Batman, especially Rogues Gallery we're focusing on today. We talked a bit about Batman last time and his dealie, which I feel like I talk about a lot. So, or at least I have one other episode about it. Maybe two. Actually, never mind.
It has certainly been well explored in canon, if you will.
Yes. Yeah. There is, in fact, there is one, if anybody, if you've ever read Batman White Knight, there is actually a minute where, or the ending, that plot line goes with the Joker is momentarily or for some amount of time cured of his mental illness by a compound. Well, it actually starts with Batman force feeding him a bunch of pills because he's trying to poison the water supply of Gotham again. And Batman is fighting with him and he gets mad and he actually, enough that the cops, they're like, Batman, why don't you chill out? And so it's an episode of brutality, vigilante brutality, which
Jeez.
you could say Batman's guilty of anyway, but this was like pretty pointed. He was already subdued, right?
Hardcore. Yeah.
So he stuffed pills in his mouth and he's like, why don't you take your medicine or something? And it was not poison or anything. It wasn't the stuff he was going to poison. I don't remember where he got it from, but it seemed like the cocktail of meds helped him. And this is spoiler territory for Batman White Knight. Skip ahead about a minute or two. I know I said we weren't going to talk about Batman, but this is it's the Joker too. There we go. And when the Joker it turns out they don't have evidence to convict the Joker. And this is a version where he's Jack Napier, I believe.
Uh-huh.
And so when he's cured, he runs as like a citizen's advocate to beef up the police and to stop relying on vigilantism, which is very interesting. And they have no evidence to convict him of anything, as it turns out, except for minor crimes. They're like, we know you're a murderer. And it's like, ha, ha, prove it. So anyway, but no, it's a weird.
That's like
it's a
in
weird
the Harley
story.
Quinn. In the Harley Quinn show, he runs for mayor and he wins. So after he like reforms himself. But anyway,
this is it's interesting. This one turns out that the medication was actually engineered by Harley Quinn. And she got it into the right place. She didn't know Batman was going to do that, I think. But anyway, the very ending is Batman actually taking his mask off in front of Commissioner Gordon and telling him, I know that I, started this out about justice, but I enjoy hurting people and I need to do something about that. Basically, and during this whole time, Robin or Dick Grayson, he's Nightwing at that point, and Batgirl have both joined the police force and are leading the detectives with some of the Bat family tech. And so it's interesting. I don't know how it holds up with ACAB, but anyway, all cops are Batmen, I think is what that stands for in Gotham now.
oh my.
Anyway, so that's it. Now, but enough about the Joker. We've trodden over that well-worn path before. You had Riddler stuff on your mind.
Well, I think that the Riddler is an interesting one to bring up because he has a very specific psychosis in the comics, at least, and in the animated series where he is obsessed with getting people to solve his riddles. So, like, I guess it's sort of this superiority complex, but he also has insecurity and he wants people to like think he's smarter than everyone else and trick them into force them through horrible situations into solving his riddles.
Yes, no, that's a lot of people have been upset, some anyway, of Batman fans of the comics that didn't really love the way he was depicted in The Batman. Myself, I didn't really have a problem with it because there was a lot of riddles and they were the same level of ridiculous in a way.
Right.
So I felt like there was an homage there. The interesting thing is I think the problem they had was that he was killing people like serial killer style.
Right.
But in the comics, he does kill sometimes, and then there's other times where he's just more of a criminal genius sort of a deal. Like,
Right. But the thing is,
yeah,
a lot of times with the Riddler, I think he has no clear motivation other than to like trap people inside a real world mystery box where
yes,
they can't possibly find the answer without some weird, except Batman, of course, always knows right away what the answers to everything are. But
you could say he's like low key Saw, maybe.
right. But yeah, the whole bringing in the brutal as the more horror aspect into the film, that it didn't mind me so much. I thought it was crossing a little bit into other villains' territories that made him kind of a hybrid. That sometimes it bothers me in other Batman stories where the Joker becomes too riddly, where they have the Joker like putting out clues and stuff of like, that are way too much on the Riddler's territory. So I think there's a lot of these overlaps. But for me, the Riddler is this guy who's obsessed with being the smartest guy in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's always supposed to, in my mind, be a little geeky, a little nerdy. And that was the one thing that was missing, for sure from the Batman.
Yeah,
film.
I mean, they did kind of lean into making him incel-y.
Yeah, and that's the thing lately. It's like every misunderstood mentally ill bad guy has to be an incel who hates women and thinks that he deserves to get laid or whatever. But
I think, and you could say his followers were more that kind of guy, or the frustrated,
right.
whatever you want to call them.
That was one thing I did like was he was like a Reddit, like the Lord of the Internet, which was a good update.
Yes, that was very interesting to see how would the Riddler use modern technology. There's a compulsion there, and I think we were saying how, like Catwoman, for example, and some of the others you wouldn't really say are mentally ill so much.
Right.
Whereas, I mean, maybe not mentally healthy, maybe, not great on their mental hygiene, but, the Riddler definitely is this compulsion. In the Long Halloween, which I mentioned before, there's a part where the Riddler is recruited by the mob to try to solve the mystery of who is the holiday killer, because they're targeting mob people, right? And so he doesn't succeed, but that's his, that was kind of in that iteration of the Riddler, that's kind of his bag, is this, like, he was being a criminal consultant, if you will.
Right. And I like that each of them have their own, that they are each an archetype. Mm-hmm. I don't like when they blend it too much, when, one villain sort of oozes into another villain's territory. Like when Clayface becomes just a brute, but that's more a Killer Croc's thing. So it's like, I don't like them to, I like it when they're these archetypal evil, archetypes of evil, different aspects of evil, because then it's more clear what the hero is fighting against.
Yeah. You got some interesting ones and Bane as well. One of the things that I was glad to see in that movie with Bane, The Dark Knight Rises, is that Bane was represented like in the comics, where he's more of a military strategist as well as a, blunt force warrior. And a lot of the iterations, and I think even the animated series somewhat, I think just showed him as a big heavy. And so in the comics, a lot of times, like where he does break Batman like he does in the movie, and he does these other things, it's almost like, it's kind of like the Hulk in a way, whereas the Hulk in the comics can talk and say things, whereas the Hulk in the MCU took a minute. They did get there to where he talks, I think, but pre-Ragnarok, I don't remember him saying very much. And so, but in previous iterations, he was always, Hulk mad, Hulk smash.
Right, exactly.
Once again, they worked that in for, he may drop a few prepositions or what am I saying? Yeah. But
well, and everyone knows with Bane that, all luchadors are notoriously famous for their military prowess. No, I'm kidding. No, but the more modern iterations of Bane, where he's a brilliant strategist. Yeah.
There is no totally. There is a crossover look there for sure. There's a Funko Pop series where they did several Batman characters with like a Day of the Dead pattern of costuming.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
the Bane one is really cool, but man, that is a real luchador look.
Yeah. Well, that's what he originally was.
Did he come from?
In the
Was he
the original Bane was a luchador.
Was
yeah.
a luchador? Interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't know
And he
that.
got the whatever it is, that venom or whatever they call it. That
Yeah,
gives
they
him
call
his
it venom.
strength.
Yeah.
He got it to be the best wrestler, and then ended up turning to a crime, as you do in Batman. You know?
Sure, of course. Yeah, there's always.
But he's another one that's not super relevant to the mental health discussion, I don't think, in certain iterations. But
Yeah, I mean, chemically induced rage, right? That's part of venom.
True.
So
That's
you could
true.
say, which does fit into the DSM. Like usually that's used in terms of substance abuse, which I guess you could call this substance abuse.
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah.
Except the high would be power. Maybe.
Right. But yeah, you're right. The drug, I think in the animated show they have him be super addicted to the drug, and that's why he starts working for the mafia or whatever to keep getting access to it or something like that.
Some people believe that in the Batman, starring Robert Pattinson, that when in the end when he uses that emergency shot of adrenaline or whatever to kill himself, that it does look a lot like Venom from the comics. So some people are wondering if that'll tie in, if maybe Brain Enterprises developed this Venom for him to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And is that going to be another conflict of like Bane gets a hold of it? Who knows? Anyway, that's a different type of theory. But
before we move too far away from the Riddler,
go on.
I was going to say, and this is a little bit funny, but it's also serious with the whole internet thing. I think it's really fortunate for their storytelling capabilities, because if you recall in the old iterations of Batman, they always had the villains somehow taking over the airwaves and broadcasting their master plan over every television and every radio, and like that never made any sense. And so it's good that there is an actual media format now that you can communicate with the entire world, passively, rather than like, oh my gosh, the Joker pushed his button again and took over everyone's television set.
That is always interesting, and they'll do it by hijacking one TV station.
Right. I put this thing in that the Mad Hatter made, and bazoon, all this energy goes out, and I can reach every single screen in the world. So yeah.
The Mad Hatter is an interesting one. I wanted to say one more thing about Riddler, though.
Yes.
Is that there is, once again, in the comics, and one little storyline where the Riddler actually learns that Bruce Wayne is Batman's secret identity, but then when he is caught, and in that Arkham, I believe he's even in that cell with the floor-to-ceiling window that we talked about last time. And Batman's talking to him, and he's like, well, what's to stop me now from just telling everybody? And Batman's like, you won't, because this is the ultimate riddle that no one else can solve, but you've solved. You're going to tell everybody,
right?
You won't be special anymore, basically. And so you might argue that's Batman taking advantage of his mental illness, but he's basically just stating like your compulsion will not allow you to share this, which it would be very much in his interest to do, whether he sells it to the highest bidder, whether he just tells everybody and sort of blows up Bruce's spot. But he doesn't. And so that's a pretty good example of a compulsion that is counter to his own interests, right?
That's a great point. Yeah.
And it's a great way to use that. So I wanted to hit. There are a couple people that I think are really sort of interesting. The Mad Hatter is one of them. Who, what is his real name? I had it here somewhere, but who knows? But I mean, everybody probably knows. People are yelling at their podcast player right now. But he's a good example of sort of secondary rogues who have a thing. if that makes sense. I will say Mad Hatter is, I don't
Jervis
know,
Tetch.
Jervis Tetch. There we go. And he's not actually. A lot of times he's considered a primary member of the Rogues Gallery, but in some ways, so you've got him, and you've got Scarface, and the ventriloquist. You've got Calendar Man, who has been featured bigger into certain stories than you'd think. Long Halloween being one of them. Obviously, I think whoever was animating and writing that one was probably like, it's a holiday-based killer who kills every holiday. We got to bring Calendar Man in. This is the only use, literally the only use for him. But,
right, exactly.
But their mental health, because it's more interesting, obviously, to the plot, factors into giving them a colorful thing. And Mad Hatter's always been interesting to me because he's just like, hey, he's like, basically he thinks he's the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland, kind of, which you could say is probably pretty mentally unwell.
He's certainly obsessed with that story and with the Mad Hatter.
Yes.
I don't know if he thinks he is, but he's also like a genius in robotics, at least in the later
right.
iterations.
Doesn't his hat, he has like a series of hats. If he puts one on you, he can control your mind with his hat or something like that.
Yeah, mind control, and he's got like little robots that can go and do his bidding. And
I wonder if the Penguin got mad that he kind of stole his aesthetic. For at least with the hat.
With the top hat.
Because that's a very specific
to the same
look.
tailor. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I liked in the animated series, I don't know if you remember the origin of the Mad Hatter. It happened in one of those many, many abandoned amusement parks in Gotham City.
Right.
But like he had this woman he was infatuated with. He was like the original incel villain actually in Batman, but he was obsessed with this woman.
Alice?
And then her name was Alice, and he kidnapped her and he took her to this place that looked like Alice in Wonderland. I think she went on one date with him at this park back when it was open, and then she didn't want to continue their relationship, and he became obsessed. And so then he used mind control gadgets so that she would do his bidding. Mm-hmm. And then at the end, he realized that she wasn't in love with him. He was just using her, but he like lost his mind because he couldn't have what he wanted, and all of his technological research had gone into controlling other people. Mm-hmm. So, he had to find another outlet for that and ended up as a criminal.
Really? Yes. Really interesting to look at that, how that, he didn't get what he wanted, and he is a white male, so that wasn't okay.
Exactly.
And it drove him to the brink. Yeah. Let me ask you about Mr. Freeze. What do we think about Dr. Victor Freeze, which, once again, very funny. His name is spelled more like Fries, I think, but it's pronounced Freeze. Once again, one of the classic characters that is his name, kind of like Edward Nygma is the Riddler, for example, right? But so with Mr. Freeze, what's his deal? I would say, obviously, driven mad by grief is the shorthand for that character, the way he's presented in the stories.
Right. Well, I think he has the technology to keep his wife from dying, and then becomes obsessed with trying to find a cure, obviously. And I don't know, drama.
She has one of those vague conditions that makes you going to die but beautiful. And if he ever wakes her up, she'll die or whatever. So, which there are versions of the comic and the animated show where she actually does wake up, and I think she becomes like a supervillain in some version of it. But anyway, that's way down the road. But his thing becomes he has the technology to keep her alive, but he doesn't have the technology to save her, right? So, that I think that drives him crazy because he has all this power, but yet cannot do the one thing that he wants to do. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a real, well, once again, there's kind of a compulsion, but you could say that, he's not letting go, certainly. Very much not letting go. And also There's something there too, and one of the things that you could say all of these individuals could be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. People don't talk
Totally,
about
yeah.
that sometimes, but it's antisocial in that case does not mean shy, as people usually use it in day to day. It means antisocial, meaning like anti-society, basically criminal thinking, and it's very close to narcissism. But to say so, for example, someone who is more antisocial would try to solve this problem by, say, becoming a criminal, trying to steal the resources, rising to the top of Gotham's underworld, ostensibly and, well, theoretically spending a lot more time being a criminal than actually researching as a brilliant scientist how to cure a condition, right?
Right.
Which a less or a more pro-social individual or a well-adjusted individual would do the latter, which, is let me actually partner up. By the way, there's this benevolent billionaire in this town who would probably, love to help me find a cure if I just approached him. I mean,
Right.
People say that, I hear people say, well, why doesn't Bruce Wayne just give back to the city financially? And it's like, well, if you read the stories, he does. Why doesn't he help the police station? He does.
Yeah.
I mean, he does all those things and beats up criminals with his fists.
Oh, one of the things about Victor Fries, in certain iterations of the certain versions of the story, is that he accidentally created the disease that his wife has. So
so there's that
is
grief,
driven
trauma, self-inflicted,
and that goes on with that sort of narcissistic, or at least that wanting to solve everything yourself. I think because he blames himself, he's unable to accept any help because he was the one who caused the accident in the first place that caused her to be in that state, and then he also screwed himself up. That's why he has to be in the suit all the time. But and then I think the reason he underwent the change and was in the suit is because he was trying to perform the experiments on himself to save his wife, and it's very complicated. He's actually one of my favorite Batman villains if he's done well, not the Arnold Schwarzenegger one. I'm like, no,
what? That's
no
the most popular one. No.
No scientist ever works out that much. But yeah. So anyway, I think he's very complicated. I think it's not clear cut whether he's a good guy or a bad guy because he's not just into robbing banks.
Right, and he's not. He only typically only commits crime if he feels it will facilitate his mission. Right, basically.
Right.
Stealing supplies or kidnapping a scientist, or or something like that, right? Or if he feels like something, and he's not always logical about it. He does feel like his wife's condition is threatened at times in a way that,
right,
maybe is not justified, and maybe a disproportionate response.
Exactly. Right. I love the animated Mr. Freeze movie that they made. I don't know if you ever saw it.
I have not.
But
that's something I'll have to check out.
It's probably on YouTube or something free, but it has Batgirl on it. It has, I think it was pre-Nightwing, but it has Dick Grayson as an older Robin. And I think that one actually ends with his wife dying. So it's kind of intense, but, or he dies to save his wife. And then Bruce Wayne's company finds a cure for her or something. I don't know.
Something like that. Right.
It's a really good movie.
Huh. I'll have to check that one out. That's a good one to be aware of. I have always also thought it's interesting the humility that he has as well, calling himself Mr. Freeze when he clearly is a doctor. So, a lot of doctors like to push that. I'm sorry,
that's
it's Dr.
True.
Freeze.
You think he'd call himself Dr. Freeze.
I've always thought that was weird. But maybe it's just funny that he's in the midst of all of it. He's like, that's one thing I can do that's not douchey. Is just be like, I'm just Mr. Freeze. Dr. Freeze was my father. I don't know why he talks like that. Sorry. I was trying to, I don't know why I did a voice, but here's an interesting one. Hugo Strange, never really depicted in a lot of things, but he is one of the oldest villains in Batman. He's a mad scientist
right.
who is Yeah, who is really obsessed with Batman's identity. And apparently, I have never read this anywhere other than I read it on the Batwiki a little minute ago during the little break there. He's one that people aren't as familiar with, but he's obsessed with Batman's identity, and apparently, as it says here, has donned the Batman identity from time to time. So I don't know what that means exactly.
Huh.
Probably without permission, which I'm pretty sure he could get him for copyright, but
He's the only one.
lawyer in Gotham is Harvey Dent, so what are you going to do?
That's true. I'm only familiar with the iteration that's in the Harley Quinn show. But yeah.
Oh, so they have brought him in there. They do bring a lot of less or more obscure characters, basically. So that's just one kind of obsession, and I think you see that reflected in a lot of villains. I know we see it in, not to hop over to Marvel for a second, but Venom, for example, his whole deal is he both often wants to kill, but is also obsessed to the point of not romantically, but basically being enamored with Spider-Man. He sometimes tries to emulate Spider-Man. That's the whole Lethal Protector series, which is hinted at in the second movie, which was more fun than it deserved to be. But so Venom, has that obsession. And so Hugo Strange apparently has that as well, to where there's a crossover. And we could compare that to the Joker a little bit as well. But in this one, he's still revengey. He's not... He does want to kill Batman a lot of times,
right?
But and he also has, as a lot of them do, a history of trauma. He was abandoned as a child, a genius, of course. A lot of geniuses in superhero universes. That's one of the superpowers that's pretty common,
especially the villain. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So anyway,
evil
so you
genius
see that
thing.
there. Trauma is a really
like
interesting
the Lex Luthor thing. Not technically a Batman villain, but Lex Luthor is supposed to be an evil genius.
Yeah, and sometimes that's like you have to give them something, right? Not all of them. Lex Luthor, another example, which kind of the Joker too. Not a super ninja, can't necessarily go toe. Well, certainly Lex can't go toe to toe. Although they gave him a super suit for a while, a robot suit a mini mech that he made, right? Like an Iron Man suit.
I mean, I think if your main villain was Superman, you would want some sort of super suit.
You'd want something.
Because he could just come in your house in a flash and beat the crap out of you.
He's usually right, exactly. And of course, he's usually just hucking kryptonite at him, it seems like. But
yeah, right.
It's a very plentiful resource, surprisingly enough. So speaking of trauma, one of the ones that is actually a great animated movie based off the animated series, is Mask of the Phantasm.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the Phantasm is Andrea Beaumont. I had to look up the name. I remembered her, but not her name. And she was traumatized by her father's death, and she blames several people for it, one of which is the Joker. Catwoman, I believe, is also on the list, and Batman is on the list.
Yeah,
I think for failing to save him or something. So
that's a good movie. Yeah, and that was one of the first animated kids movies with the PG rating that everybody freaked out about.
That's right. Because it does have the violence. Because people do get murdered, unlike the animated series.
Like Lord one time or something, damn or some mild swear word or something.
Well, if I remember, the things that I remember watching it being like, oh, I don't remember people actually getting killed in the animated series. And a few people get murdered.
Yeah, there are several
successful
people get
murders?
killed in the animated series.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, definitely.
I thought they just referenced them.
Do you remember
A-Team rules?
I'll let you finish your thought if you want, but then I was going to go back to the animated series and the Mob.
Oh, sure. No, I just was going to say that it seemed to have more violent direct on-screen deaths. And also, Batman and Andrea Beaumont hook up in that movie. There's at least, walking. There's nothing graphic, of course. But, there's the kissing and then walking out on a balcony shirtless. Bruce.
Right,
Bruce was shirtless. I should say.
right. There's the curtains blowing in the breeze, like they
Yes, that
say in
kind
the
of thing.
Truman Show.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, you never see anything. It's just, but yeah,
So you do
yeah,
see
but
trauma with an antisocial bent, as far as this is definitely an unhealthy, very similar to Batman's, except murder instead of trying to stop evil is going and finding very specific vengeance identified targets.
Right, and pointing out the fact that if like vigilantes are usually, if not always, mentally ill people, there's something off if you want to go take the law into your own hands and feel like that's your
right. There's a certain level of narcissism that you see.
Yeah,
and
right.
and interestingly enough, Nightwing and then later Jason Todd as Red Hood often point that out when they're talking to Batman. Be like, Batman, you're kind of messed. And in some iterations, I can't remember if it was Hush or one of those storylines, Catwoman and Batman, if they're ongoing on again, off again romance, he actually sours things when Catwoman is helping him the whole time, and then finds out that he's been testing / investigating her, like he's not trusting her. He's about ready to tell her he's Bruce Wayne, but then she's like, "Hey, I discovered that you don't trust me, and so we're done." And they break up because of his.
Well, there's a reason why he's always dating bad people, or not, at least crazy people. He's dating people that turn out to be the bad guy, and even if he doesn't know it at the time, but he's attracted to people like himself because he's narcissistic. So
and antisocial in his own way, where he does hurt people, as we said. He doesn't kill people, at least not directly.
Right.
Some people die in the course of the misadventures. Very original in the old comics, he did occasionally take a life, sort of like a cop under a justified like I read an old one where he actually has a rifle. Then he's like, I hate to take a life, but I have to in this case.
But oh well. Bang.
Unsanctioned execution. But not anymore. Modern Batman doesn't do that. And one thing to your point.
Although.
Yeah. Well,
it depends on the iteration. But
sure, of course. You've got some of those. One quick thing, though, to your point about the mob, but as you put it, because, of course, we know he dates Catwoman, and in many cases, they stay together, and there's a Catwoman and Batman series where they actually are an older couple. They've married and have a daughter.
Right.
And but then Talia Ghul, Ra's al Ghul's daughter, he fathers Damian Wayne with her, and I think that one thing that the Batman got pretty well was they kind of had that spirit of antisocial where he and Catwoman had this hit it off where they're like, he sees this and goes, I like this. Right. I like this dysfunctional, I may not call it that, but it's basically they're both essentially criminals. You got to remember Batman is breaking the law, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so he has that bent.
Yeah, they're messed up people.
Sure. And so he is attracted to messed up people in a way, right? All the traumatized Robins. Totally. So mobsters, you were going to say.
Well, I just was thinking about this episode in the animated show, and I don't know if you remember it, where the two crime head families, Falcone and the other guy, I don't remember his name.
Maroni?
Probably, yeah. Maroni, were childhood friends, and then one of them got stuck on the railroad tracks, and the other one tried to help him, and he lost his leg. Do you remember this?
I don't remember this.
But it's just an example of like that whole story about like childhood trauma and like how it influenced their relationship with each other. And then they went off and they sort of became, and then at the end of the show, they sort of reconcile personally, obviously not the crime families, but and it's an interesting, I think a lot of Batman, first of all, it was just an example of why that show had a lot of depth. This for a kids show, it was not written as a kids show, especially the earlier seasons. But
I gotta re-up on this. I gotta go rewatch because I don't remember a lot of this.
Yeah, it was about 10 years ago, but Abby and I watched like the whole show just to revisit it, and so it's a little more fresh in my mind. It's still a long time ago, but I wasn't a kid the last time I saw it. But then it also got me thinking about how almost every single episode of that show is centered around uh, has mental health as a component of it,
They
whether or
really
not
do
they
showcase
intended
that
that.
part. Yeah.
But yeah, whether or not they intended that, it has a lot of complexity when it comes to, the psychology. I think psychology, that's the word I was looking for. It has psychology as a huge component of it, which comes from the comics. I mean,
Sure.
but a lot of the movies, at least up until the latest ones, have been missing that component, where it's more just action adventure and comic book hero, whatever you expect in a comic book movie, But
yeah, that is an interesting piece that I believe that it's used in fiction quite a lot, right? As mental health and psychology, because it's fascinating to people. The representation is not always, as we put it last time, super,
it's almost never correct,
super nuanced and respectful.
Yeah.
No, in fact, it is one thing, and when you see the effects of trauma, and gosh, it's been a couple of weeks since we did part 1. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Did I mention Thomas and Martha Wayne in the Flashpoint alternate universe? I can't remember if I did. Flash runs really fast on a treadmill and breaks the universe.
Right.
Makes an alternate branch off timeline, and he discovers that he discovers that in this universe, Thomas Wayne is Batman, and the grief, and Bruce is the one that was shot in the alley.
Interesting.
And so the grief drove Thomas the same way it did Bruce. Interestingly enough, there is a female Joker in this universe who is Martha Wayne. Her trauma drove her crazy in a way that became the Joker. And so they are squaring off. And so the whole Batman not killing the Joker takes on a new wrinkle in this version,
Well, that's a little exploration of the role of genetics in mental health, and how there is an inevitability that it will come to a head, and you have to face it. And if you're not prepared with the right tools, it could be really bad.
Yes,
for a lot of people. I mean,
yeah, exactly. You either become Batman or the Joker, as I've heard some people say. We all have a little bit of both inside us. Anyway, so interestingly enough,
just like Two-Face.
Yeah,
not quite so blatant.
I rewatched yesterday No Country for Old Men.
Oh, because I haven't seen that in years.
Yeah, Carter hadn't seen it, and he wanted to watch it. So, and it struck me how much Anton something, the murder, Javier Bardem's character, one of the scariest characters in fiction, in my opinion. And most directly a force to be reckoned with. But he does the little gimmick. His character, he flips a coin off. There's times where he's considering killing someone, and he flips a coin. And he does it in a more menacing way than I have ever seen anyone represent Two-Face. There's the scene where he's at a gas station, and the gas station guy makes some comment about, "Oh, you coming? I saw your plates. You coming from Dallas?" And he's like, "Why do you care where I'm coming from?" And he flips a coin and makes the guy call it. And the guy's like, "Why? What am I going to win something?" And he's like, "You're going to win everything." Meaning he's going to kill. Anyway, just very chilling. But yeah,
that got me thinking. The depiction in film of Batman and other superheroes to some extent, but Batman specifically, because I think there's been a huge evolution in the comics over the years, and it doesn't always go the same way. But the different eras of the comic are very, very different, especially with the depiction of mental illness and psychology. But when you look at the depiction in film, they make the mistake of going back to the origin story all the time. And when you look at that source material, it's way less developed than a lot of the other source material that they could draw on, which is why the most current one with Robert Pattinson, it's better because it just skips ahead to when he's already Batman. It's a little too origin story still for my taste, especially like this day and age, but it's like,
I was so glad that it didn't have very much of it. You're right; it still worked it in, but
exactly.
But at least it had a different
origin
wrinkle
of some of the villains. Yeah, but there's this series of graphic novels that start with Contagion and then work their. Have you read those?
Yeah,
And
you turned me on to Contagion years ago.
yes,
Yeah.
okay, great. So some of that writing, like if you were to make a movie, it would be R-rated. It would be intense, right? If you stayed true to the source material. And I'm not saying that's like the best thing to do with a superhero movie, but if you want to make a modern and like gritty film, you don't have to go back to the golden age of comics and then try to make it gritty.
Yeah.
There's been so much great stuff written that is that,
Yes.
that is well developed and has all of that nuance and has a lot of even better depiction of psychology and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. No, you're absolutely right. In fact, one of the things that stands out to me in Contagion, where there's a virus that takes over Gotham that makes people crazy, and it's really
their faces
bad.
melt.
Yeah, their faces melt. They become aggressive. And there's a scene in there where Batman and Commissioner Gordon are clearing a building or going through a building for some reason to try to find, because the whole mission is they have to find the cause. It's also a good one for a lot of like crossover stories. They have a lot of the Justice League members and things in there eventually too, if I remember right, or at least the extended Bat family.
Yeah. And Ra's al Ghul.
Ra's al Ghul, I believe, is the
eventually
spoiler alert.
Comes the mastermind.
So, but one of the things I really remember is that, speaking of trauma, that they allude to, that they don't often allude to in action stories, is that while they're in this building, a guy comes out whose face is melting or whatever, and he says something about, "Hey, my family died from this thing, and would you guys give them a message for me?" And he has like a gun or whatever. And could you go to heaven and tell them that I'll be there soon? And he's obviously out of logic, out of deranged. And Commissioner Gordon shoots him and kills him, right? And then he says, and that's, basically he says something like, "Poor guy. That was terrible. That was terrible." And it's not easy living with that kind of thing. And then, which is not usually alluded to. Usually the good guy kills someone and they're like, meh, you want to go to lunch?
Yeah.
And so, so then Batman says to him, "You had no choice. You were defending our lives and you had no choice." And he says something like, "Well, that's easy for you to say." Right? Because Batman doesn't put himself in the position. Batman would have, probably punched the guy, who knows.
Right.
Or bataranged, if he was alone, or I guess.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
But so, anyway, so you kind of see that too. And of course, there is the trauma that Commissioner Gordon has from the Killing Joke, for example, when Barbara Gordon was paralyzed for what is either the rest of her life or a few minutes, depending on which comic line you take.
Right.
But
exactly.
So
it becomes Oracle, right? But,
she becomes. Yeah. Which is an interesting thing because she's a superhero with a disability. There aren't as many of those apparent. At least not, that type of disability.
I would highly recommend that comic series, that graphic novel specifically, the first one, Contagion, just because it does have a lot of that nuance and addresses some of the stressors that, they don't necessarily go into. Yeah. Batman's a little more level-headed in that one too, which I actually prefer because he was motivated by trauma, but in certain versions like this one, he's more of the detective. He's not constantly beating people up. He's more of the, trying to problem solve and is there because no one else can do it. That was another
strength of this last movie too, is
because he has the resources. Yeah, exactly.
They did a little. People say they never had before. The Dark Knight does that a bit though, where it shows him doing forensic science as well as investigating as Bruce Wayne and stuff. The interesting thing. Hang on 1 second. An interesting thing about that. Drew a blank. Oh yeah, no, I was going to say that one of the things that you have is also the anti-hero. And while we have a couple minutes left, I wanted to mention Azrael, I believe is his name.
Yes, who's in that comic too.
He's also in that comic. And while Batman had a busted back from Bane, a broken back from Bane, he was in recovery for that. is from his triple B, as the doctors called it. It's a common enough. Bane-related injuries are common enough in the DC universe that they have the classification for them. But this guy who was basically an anti-hero, kind of super aggressive, for some reason, instead of Nightwing, Batman invites Azrael to take over as Batman for a minute. And he, in true anti-hero fashion, is much more brutal than Batman is.
Yeah.
And at one point even allows, there's a serial killer, I believe, that they find out is trapped in his own killing machine or something. And he just stands there and watches him die and doesn't let him out like Batman probably would let him out, right?
Right.
And Commissioner Gordon is furious with him. And at some point after, he's basically like, F off, Commissioner. And leaves, and then Commissioner Gordon's just like, I don't know who this guy is, but I know he's not my friend.
Yeah. And they addressed that in Contagion because it's one of the first long story arcs after Bruce Wayne comes back. And there's a scene in that comic where Gordon's like, you are him, right? The original Batman, my friend. And Batman goes, the one and only. And I just love that frame where it just got him like with a little smile, because Batman doesn't usually smile, and it's like the one and only. And I could just imagine the voice in my head of what that would sound like. But
the one and only. No, just kidding.
Right. Where are the other drugs going?
No, and interestingly enough, he did have to fight Azrael to reclaim the title of Batman. He had to basically beat him off fight him to some extent. That was, blooper reel on that one. Apologies out there. That was way beyond the PG rating for that one. No, I'm just kidding. So he had to fight Azrael to reclaim his role as Batman, which is interesting. And then they call upon him. One of my favorite bits in Contagion is when they find the cure and Azrael has to fight his way past a military blockade to get back into Gotham, and with it, and he has to like dive into the river, and he does all this he's like sitting on top of a car, driving it with his feet or some nonsense.
Right.
And then right after that, it cuts to, I think it's Nightwing, if I remember right. It's Dick Grayson who just says like, wow, we already had that shipped here or something like that.
Yeah, right.
We already had the cure.
Too bad he doesn't know that we just flew it in the Batwing.
We just flew it in and said we have the cure, and everyone was excited. So once again, compulsion.
He had emailed like the formula, and
that's it. Yeah,
they resequenced it. And, but then.
Probably Lucius Fox.
Yeah, exactly.
But, anyway,
you're right. I love that. I forgot about that. Yeah, but that's a
great gag. It's a great joke to write into it, but also compulsive violence, right?
Yeah,
I mean, really, if we want to look at it in that lens. So,
right.
Well, awesome. Thank you. This is great. I mean, this makes me, looking over this like secondary and tertiary, B and C list villain rogue gallery members. Makes me, I want to do something with some of these. We didn't even get into like Professor Pig, who is like Saw, apparently, wears a pig mask and tortures people to death with drills, hammers, and ice picks. We probably, I'll probably need to. There's a lot of these I need to probably dig into a little bit more, scrape the barrel a little more after all the stuff that I've already said. But yes, thank you everybody for listening too.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Court Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court Arts shows, visit courtemparts.com.